Welcome back to the last part of my interview with Ivor Davis, who accompanied the Beatles on tour in 1964. If you haven't seen it yet, go and watch the first three, especially including the one where he witnessed the Beatles meeting Elvis. But this last one has a Beatles connection with Ivor being down in California. He was one of the first journalists on the scene in the infamous Charles Manson murders, which of course were linked to the Beatles and the White Album. And Ivor tells us what happened, the people he spoke to, and his significant part in Charles Manson's trial.
Here's the thing. I was on the case from day one when we discovered that Charles Manson had sent his gang out to kill the beautiful actress Sharon Tate and her friends, famous Hollywood celebrity hairdresser Jay Sebring, friends of Sharon's husband Roman Polanski, who happened to be at the house at the time, and they were all killed. I was there on day one, and as soon as Manson was arrested for the murders, it was announced by the police chief that he lived at the Spahn Movie Ranch. So when I heard the Spahn Movie Ranch, I didn't know about it, and I immediately drove out to the Spahn Movie Ranch. Manson was arrested in jail, waiting to be brought to trial. And then I started talking to the members of the Manson family who were not involved in the killings. And they told me a story that I didn't believe. They said Charlie believed that the Beatles were sending him secret messages hidden in the lyrics of the White Album. Helter Skelter, Revolution, Sexy Sadie. And the Manson acolytes said, Charlie made us believe that the Beatles songs were messages to him, warning him that there would be a race riot in America. And because, fortunately, the Beatles warned him, Charlie was going to take them all into the desert, hide out in an underground city. Wow. until the riots were over. Then they come up from their underground. And I mean, I heard this absolute rubbish in my mind. I mean, what is Helter Skelter to do with race riots? A revolution, okay. Piggies are the cops in America. Yeah. So Manson, because he fed his devotees LSD, other drugs, they all believed it. I mean, even in today, 50 years later, I'm sitting here saying, well, you know, everybody saw that the White Album lyrics for the songs has secret messages about race rioting in America. And I heard that and I thought, what a load of old toffee this is. But I didn't tell the Manson devotees that I thought they were talking a bunch of crap. No. Because then they would have stopped talking to me. So then I actually wrote a book before the trial began, based on what I told you, that Manson said the Beatles made me do it, which was still to this today was total rubbish. And even as we talk about it now, it doesn't make any sense, does it? Of course it doesn't. And in my book, I spoke to somebody, who was it now, who said, we got a call from Squeaky Frome, a woman called Squeaky Frome, who said she wanted to talk to the Beatles. Squeaky Frome was the right-hand woman of Charles Manson. So Manson was going to talk to the Beatles and ask them. I mean, you know, this script makes no sense. And yet the prosecution were able to prosecute Manson and get a successful conviction based on this thesis that I've just said, that he believed that the Beatles were giving him messages. Now, I have since then become very good friends with a 14-year-old girl at the time who was recruited by Manson. And she says to me, we sat at the movie ranch and Charlie told us played us the White Album 6 times a day. And we believed what he said. We believed the Beatles were sending him messages. And when I spoke to John about it, John said, years later, John said, what's Helter Skelter got to do with fucking knifing people to death? And Ringo, of course, knew Roman Polanski, whose wife Sharon, 8 months pregnant, was murdered, and was very upset. And it makes no sense, but that's the. So when I heard, having traveled with the Beatles, that the Beatles were being blamed, their lyrics were being blamed for these murders, I mean, my reaction was, as any, I think, normal person would say, was, you know, what have you been taking too many drugs? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Now, wasn't your book actually used during the trial?
Yes. What actually happened was, I wrote a book based on my interviews with the Manson people. It was called Five to Die. I thought it was a terrible title, but and then I discovered, because I covered the Manson trial every day, the district attorney told me that they took that thesis from my book and used it as a blueprint for the prosecution. But it worked. I don't care. They could have said, David made me do it, and they're using that thesis, got the jury to convict, and it worked. And I think, you know, justice was done, although the way it was done was somewhat somewhat crazy. Yeah. And the district attorney on the case said that Vincent Bugliosi was the prosecutor, the main prosecutor in the Manson murders, and used this Beatles thesis and got a conviction. Which, I mean, they were guilty of the murders.